Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today, we're talking about pharmaceutical industry journey mapping, and we're going to walk you through 3 steps for creating customer journey maps for patients, HCPs, and more. So, Sean, coming from the world of CX expertise, can you just tell us about journey mapping in general and how it's used in the CX world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the fundamental activity that the best companies go through that helps them intentionally create experiences that, delight their customers. And, traditional, we'll call them CX industry companies like, hotels, financial services, restaurants, anything you can think of have been like, mapping out every interaction they have with a customer from the time they first really interact with them, maybe even before they become a customer during the sales process, to the time they become a customer, to the time they first try or onboard on buy a product, experience a service, and then from thereafter, how does the relationship work and what are the different ways that the company interacts with customers? And you might say, oh man, this is obvious. Of course we know all that, but it isn't until you really map it out and you get on a whiteboard and you can brainstorm every single possible interaction your customer has with you, your company, or in pharma's case, your key partners who help deliver the healthcare outcomes that you're looking for your patient. And that obviously also includes an HCP partner. It can, right, Kirk, it can include a caregiver. It isn't directly with the patient. It can be the patient, which we're going to talk about today, just for an example.
Yeah, certainly. And there are going to be a number of journey maps, customers that you're going to want in the pharma space. Exactly. As you said, it could be the patient. It could be the caregiver. It could be the family, just even if it's not the direct caregiver, what's the experience you're providing to them? And then certainly for the actual providers of healthcare, it would be who are those HCPs, who are the office staff around that are interacting with those patients, and as well, who are those insurance providers that we are, that experience of going through these different approvals as a patient and an HCP. So there's a lot of different audiences that you'll want to map.
Madeline, our bread and butter at PeopleMetrics, like we help companies measure and manage, improve the customer experience, right? And people might be thinking, well, why are we talking about all this mapping? Because that really isn't measuring, right? But what it is planning. So what a journey map allows you to do is plan intentionally how you're going to measure, manage, and improve the customer experience. And if you don't do this, it's like you're just throwing a dart at the board. You're saying, oh, let's measure this. And why? Well, I think it's important. Well, did you map out the full customer journey? Did you think about every touch point? Did you identify a moment of truth that you think is most important? And did you then create a measurement and action plan around that moment of truth? Then that's where you see, I think, the most highly effective customer experience management programs are the ones that are done with intention. Just like the best experiences that customers have are ones that companies intentionally create rather than just randomly happen. Right? The best experiences do not happen by accident. You can give people some autonomy in delivering that experience, but the people need to know what the expectations and criteria are for a good experience for that customer. That never happens by chance. That happens intentionally. And in the book I'm writing, Pharmac Secrets, one of the principal pieces that we're talking about in there is the first step to a great experience is intentionally creating it, right? Then it's continuously managing it. And the third step is proactively acting on it. And that loop creates great customer experiences, customer-centric cultures, patient centricity, all the things that companies are looking for these days and really want. So I'm very, very bullish, on journey mapping. I also don't think it needs to be, a 6-month process with very expensive consultants that come in and you involve the world. You can do that, but it doesn't have to be that. And you can get this done much quicker than that. And you can get a lot of value out of it in a short period of time. And I think we're going to kind of go through 3 steps that you can take with some examples, and hopefully this will be of value to you if you're embarking on that journey.
Yeah, definitely. When you're talking about this exercise of identifying the touch points and identifying those moments of truth, and then setting up a listening program around those moments of truth, it really, to me, yes, you can do this comprehensive journey mapping exercise that might take months and months, but it sounds to me from what you're saying, Sean, that this kind of customer journey mapping is almost like a prioritization exercise of how are you going to choose the most important touch points to focus on first, to get that measurement going, so you can kind of get into that loop that you just talked about.
Totally. And I just want to emphasize, it's not just listening, although that's what we call it, that final step. It's listening and acting.
Yes, very important.
Right. So it's not just listening to say, oh, the customer isn't happy or the customer is happy. It's the customer isn't happy. This is what we're going to do to follow up with that customer, and this is what we're going to change in our process to make sure that that circumstance doesn't happen again to our customer. And when I say customer, I'm still talking pharma here. I'm talking about patients, HCP, caregivers, right? Like, these are the customers that pharma is interacting with most and, providing the benefit to, which is mainly the patient. And that's why we're going to focus in our example on the patient today. But keep in mind that, you can do these journey maps for your HCPs that you're interacting with as well, through a variety of communication mechanisms and the sales force and everything else. We understand that's a big component as well. But just to kind of ground ourselves today, we're going to talk about the patient.
Awesome. Kirk, do you have anything else to add to that before we launch into kind of just going over these 3 big steps in the process for journey mapping?
I think I do have a few thoughts. I think I'll wait until we get into it. I think I'm eager to get into step 1 here, and then I've got a few things to add.
All right. I know we have a visual for our step 1. So Sean, are you ready for me to
let's
everyone?
Go.
Okay, great.
So step 1 is to map out every interaction you have with your customer. And there are some key kind of buckets that you're going to want to consider when you're thinking about these interactions. We have traditional customer experience, and then we have Pharma CX. The traditional customer experience, imagine like you booking a hotel stay, which is an easy example to understand. And then the Pharma CX example is there's a new patient, right, Kirk, and they're onboarding onto a new medication, right? Onboarding, of course, is a huge event for a patient. It's important for the pharma company. Product launches are everything. Product launches depend on onboarding at a high level. Of course, the HCP influences that onboarding, but also your patient services can as well, right? So if you're offering patient services either through yourself or a hub, partner hub, there are different ways that you're interacting with that patient during that onboarding process. And that's kind of the example we're giving here today. Anything you want to add to that, Kirk?
Yeah, and I think what we're saying here, definitely on this first step here of mapping out these points of the journey. Here again, we're talking about through the lens of the patient. When you're building this, as you're doing journey mapping, it's helpful to know, of course, you first have to establish who is it that we're mapping out this journey for. Right. And then we talked earlier on about how it can get overwhelming for customers of, oh, this is going to take 6 months. This is going to take an extended period for us to do. An exercise like this can be very quick if you do it internally of just, who is the customer trying to map out? In this case, it's the patient. And then who's closest to this? For what we're going through here today, this is something you could do with just, someone in your commercial team, perhaps a case supervisor on your patient support team, someone on the medical affairs team, just a few people internally. If you target, here's who to try and map out of the patient, you can do this in an afternoon or over a few weeks. And this is a helpful exercise.
So without a doubt, you are interacting, my guess, with your customers digitally, right? So in a traditional CX scenario and you're booking a hotel stay, you may be going to the hotel's website. You may be going to sort of booking websites which are outside the hotel's purview, that they still have to understand what your experience is like. You may stay at the hotel and you may be given like an app or something where you can interact with the front desk or request things. You may be able to see your bill on a digital form or whatever. There's all these ways that people get interacted with digitally, and it's the same with the patients you may be interacting with as they're onboarding, which is a scenario we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. So very likely you have a website that offers, some helpful information around the disease state, around insurance options, around, treatment centers, if that's the case, around a bunch of other things, a bunch of pieces, or it may be a patient portal that you're giving the patients access to. Without a doubt, you should be looking at any digital touch point that you're interacting with patients as a starting point to mapping out the journey.
Hi, it's Madeline. Thanks for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If this is your first time watching, PeopleMetrics Live is a weekly live webinar session where experts from our team answer your questions about customer, employee, and patient experience, measurement, and management. And sometimes we show you how you can achieve your goals using tools within our experience management platform. We've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and this is a great way for us to share all of our knowledge with you. You can sign up for upcoming sessions of PeopleMetrics Live at www.peoplemetrics.com/events and bring a friend. Yeah, because some people might be going to, those digital touch points before you ever necessarily hear from them, right?
That's right. Why this is a great place to start. Certainly, because of course, when you're thinking of a journey map, if you haven't done this before, you do of course want to follow through that logical flow of what would this customer, in this case a patient, what would be their journey. And digital is where most everyone starts these days. Of you're noticing something as this individual, you're going to search, look up information, and this on a website or on a portal is where you're likely starting.
And for some very large mass market drugs, this might be the only thing you have.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, you might not have the rest of these that we're about to go through, which are more conform to rare disease type drugs that have a higher touch type patient support services attached to them. So this may be something that you're really going to map out like in detail, like, okay, what's the first page they're seeing on the website? Where do they go next? Why are they not going to the following page that you'd like them to go to? What is the sequence of information that you want to be able to present to them? What's the most important piece of information that you can present to that patient easily on the website, making sure that that's front and center and not hard to find. There's all these things that you may be just like really blowing up this touch point as a bucket and mapping out the journey, the ideal journey of a patient. And we're kind of jumping ahead to step 2, but I do want to say this, and this should be something that you should keep in mind as you're mapping it. The ideal outcome of a journey map, and that's step 2, is you're identifying a moment of truth or moments of truth that if your customer has a great experience with it, they're very likely to follow through on what you want them to do. Now, for a traditional CX case, it would be, maybe it's book the room, right? That could be the outcome you want. For a patient, it could be on board onto the new medication. But if this doesn't go well, it would be the opposite. The customer wouldn't book the room. They would go to somewhere else to stay, or the patient gives up on the onboarding process and says, you know what, it's too complicated. I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. The insurance is convoluted. I don't understand, this, that, and the other thing around kind of how to get onboarded onto the new product. So keep that in mind on what you think is the key touch point, which we call the moment of truth. And that's where you'd really want to hone in on really listening to the customer experience consistently to make sure you're getting that right.
All right. And we will. Yeah, I think that's good to keep in mind as we're going through this, that some of these, depending on what you're doing exactly, are going to be the ones that stand out above the rest as being those moments of truth for your patient population or, HCPs, whoever it is.
So you may have a rare disease product, that drug that yeah, you have a patient portal, you have a website, but that isn't the key moment of truth. That's not something you're going to want to monitor and measure all the time. It's not saying you never want to measure it. Maybe you want to measure it once a year, but a moment of truth is something where it's so important that if it goes wrong for one customer, you want to know about it and make it right. Right? So it means it's a continuous listening program, because you need to make sure that that is going right, and you never get it right. You're always improving it. That's the other key point.
That's a good mindset reminder that the work's never done, right? It's not a one and done situation. There's always things to improve. And I think we've certainly seen that in 2020 with COVID. And, even if you had your perfect journey map already figured out and we're measuring and listening at every touch point, it can always change, right? So are you guys ready to move to the next one?
Yeah.
All right.
So the next one, a common touch point, is some sort of contact center interaction. A contact center means a place where, a customer can come to get questions answered. And contact centers now can be on the phone, right? That's where still most of them are, where you're calling, the customer is calling you. These are also now done via chat. So that's kind of a combination of digital and contact center, right? There's these morphed touch points these days. There's a lot of online chats, handled by either humans or bots, that you have to understand what the experience is. But on our traditional CX example, it's, I booked the room on the website, but I have questions because I'm going with my family and I'm not sure if there's a bed that I can have for my kid in the room. For pharma, especially in the rare disease space, or even in the non-rare disease space, they might not have a case manager, but they may have a representative answering questions, where the patient can call and talk to someone to have their questions answered about everything to do with their onboarding process. Kirk, you've worked with a lot of these, and I know you have a lot to say here.
Precisely. And this would be that flow of commonly as a patient, it's either post-diagnosis or even pre-diagnosis. You're starting by Googling online, you're checking out these websites, checking out these patient groups or patient portals. Then following that, once you have this diagnosis, once you've been connected with one of these groups, you're reaching out to a case manager or to one of these these contact centers to speak about your medication with one of these teams.
Right. So that's if you are using case managers, understanding the experience with the case manager for each patient is often a key moment of truth. It's something we help a lot of our pharma clients with, and we hone in on what makes a great case manager experience, the value of them in terms of having them versus not. And there's a lot of very interesting data on that. But the key is if you are offering case managers, it's probably a good clue that could be a great candidate for a moment of truth kind of interaction and listening post.
Yeah, and I would like to kind of reiterate something you mentioned earlier, Sean, of, within, for example, on that website, touch point, you could dig in and do multiple journey maps there. It's helpful when you're building this kind of journey map to have your goal in mind. Here in this example, we're trying to say, what's the overall patient journey from start to end? So we can have just that broad understanding. And then who do we need to involve? We want to start with, all right, I probably want my patient support team, my commercial team here to build out this journey map. Then you may want to dig into one of these and say, to dig into the contact center, I need to bring in some different folks, and we're really honing in on this one touch point. Broadly, the goal of these journey maps, you are trying to achieve consistency across your experience. You're trying to achieve a good experience. So you can dig further into any one of these, but you do want to first start by taking this broader look and defining, as Sean said, what are these broader moments of truth that we provide?
I mean, we've done a lot of work in the case manager area, and we know the impact they have, but they have that impact when the case manager is perceived to be doing certain things, which is part of the journey as well. Like, is the case manager knowledgeable? Is the case manager available? Is the case manager empathetic? Is the case manager, someone that the patient feels comfortable asking questions to, et cetera? And when they do exhibit those kind of characteristics and more, we find that the patient is very, very likely to onboard versus when they have a poor experience with a case manager, and then they're very, very unlikely to onboard. So it is a key moment of truth, certainly for rare disease products.
Did you know that you can watch past sessions of PeopleMetrics Live right here on our YouTube channel? All you have to do is click the link above. Be sure to check them out for answers to dozens of questions, along with stories, tips, short tutorials, and best practices from our team of experts. You can click the bottom right corner of this video to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update.
All right, Madeline, let's get to the third one. Yeah, yeah, let's go.
In person.
Right, so in person is obviously a key touch point. It's something that has been less so, and in person could mean live in person, or it could mean in person you're seeing another person, kind of in, like we have an example of a telehealth touch point. Telehealth also probably could be considered a mix between in-person and digital. I mentioned chat. That could also be a mix of these. There isn't any hard definitions of these things, but if that's a way that you're interacting with patients, then I wouldn't worry about what bucket you're putting it in. I would just be concerned about and focused on, okay, this is a key way we're interacting. Is this a moment of truth? How can we get better at it? In the traditional CX example, right? If someone's going to a hotel, they're arriving, they're checking in, they're talking to the concierge, they're going to their room, that bed isn't there. So they call down, they're like, where's my bed? They're like, oh, okay, here it comes. What are the amenities? Is there a gym? Is there a spot? There's all these things that they're experiencing in person, and thank goodness we're getting back to in person these days as, the country gets back going. But in person, right, Kirk, is still a key piece for Pharmacy X also.
Yeah, and I think as you're building this journey map, you do want to, I think we're kind of cutting it two ways here in a way that's helpful. You want to think broadly, how are we delivering these services of digital versus a contact center versus in person? But then since, of course, it is a journey map, you want it to follow that journey of, where does a patient start? Where are they moving through? And then often for a patient, it is this starting with the website, talking to someone on the phone, and then having some sort of follow-up field interaction. And just as you would in this hotel as well.
So those field liaisons, right? They're people who are coming into people's homes, right? In some cases,
Absolutely.
Kirk, and that is a key moment of truth touch point for many patients, right? Because that's a very personal interaction.
Yes, with assisting them with actual, understanding of their medication and the administration of that medication. So they're doing very important work.
Yeah, and that would be another, candidate for, a key moment of truth, I would say, if that's something you're offering to patients.
Definitely. And I wanted to mention too, as we're talking about all these key moments of truth, this is for the next Pharmacy X PeopleMetrics Live that we do, but we're actually going to be digging into more of those kind of, like you said, Sean, like a universal touch point across clinical and commercial, in that the one that's coming up next for Pharmacy X. So just FYI,
right.
We'll be talking about it more.
It's a good point, Madam. And we've been talking about commercial patient onboarding, but
right.
We've done these for a clinical patient experience where they're being recruited into a trial. We're not talking about the medication, how they're reacting to the medication that's in the trial. We're talking about everything else, from recruiting to getting to the location, to understanding where it is, to understanding what they're going to be. What the process is going to be, how often are they going to have to go there, what are their interactions with the site, et cetera. And those should be mapped out too. I mean, patients, for pharma, patients are your customers in many ways. They're their ultimate customer, and intentionally mapping out their journey, no matter how you're interacting with them, is such an important activity, and will pay back so many ways beyond the ROI of it financially. It's the way to emotionally connect with your customer. These traditional CX industries, boy, they do a good job at that. They emotionally connect with their ultimate customer. And, in my book, Pharmac Secrets, I'm in awe of what the medicines that pharma create, right? And we're all getting back to normal because of them, because of the vaccines, right? But they have so much opportunity to, I think, emotionally connect with customers in a more systematic way. And the result will be ultimately a better reputation for the industry, an improved reputation and better medical outcomes, which is even more important than that for the patient, because people are used to experiencing things these days and they appreciate good experiences. And when those experiences get transferred to kind of a healthcare setting where their expectations, frankly, are a lot lower than they are when they go to a hotel, but you can surprise them. And if you're able to get it right, that will carry over to their behavior around the medication, their level of adherence, and ultimately we find in the data we see, outcomes.
Yeah, and that's I think a great point you make there, Sean. And I think a good distinction for us to make here, when you're making a journey map like this, is customer centric or patient centric of their journey. It's not, of course, you as a company, you're delivering a very highly regulated product. You have a process flow. You understand, these are the steps of actually delivering this product. This is a slightly different lens on that, of what's the customer's journey of going through that. And often what you'll find through this kind of exercise is we have a gap in our process flow. There's something that's a key moment for our customer that isn't, that we see as tangential. That is ultimately for them a gap to access, a gap to treatment,
Yep.
And it is, viewing it through their lens that's key to getting value out of this.
Such a good point, Kirk. And the way that sometimes we coach clients through this is you really have to almost be an actor and put yourself in the patient's shoes. You just got diagnosed with a rare disease. What does that feel like? When you go onto that website and then you finally talk to your physician and then you get a prescription and the HCP gives you this access to the patient support services potentially that are available, and let's say you're calling that case manager for the first time. How would you feel if that case manager was rude to you or wasn't available or it took a long time to get back to you, right? Like, feel like what is the emotional outcome of this if it goes poorly or if it goes well? Or conversely, you get them on the first ring, they're empathetic, they know they're saying, don't worry, I've talked to many patients like you and they've had very positive experiences. And these are the things that this is what the process is going to be like. It's a completely different feeling. So trying to imagine what your customer feels both ways, as a touch point goes really well, and what does that mean? And maybe when a touch point goes poorly, what does that mean? How does that make you feel? And what are your likely behaviors after that feeling? Right? And that's when journey maps really come to life, when you start to really kind of feel what your customer feels, both with positive and negative experiences at these different touch points. So it's not just mapping the touch points. Mapping the touch points are important. It's understanding what does it mean when this touch point goes well? What does it mean when this touch point doesn't go well? And how is that related to kind of the emotional connection ultimately you'll have with that customer, which hopefully will lead, and in many cases we see the data, will lead to positive behavior that leads to better outcomes long-term.
That was so well said, Sean. Like, it makes me think of what we talk about a lot here, which is that customers are going to have experiences with your brand regardless of whether you design them or not. So I think what you were just saying about looking at it through the lens of what happens if this is negative or what happens if this is positive. And that comes to your original point of you've got to make sure that you're intentionally creating that experience to have it go towards that positive outcome and just keep iterating on it that way.
Exactly. And you're not, you know what? And I write this in the book. No one is perfect the first time around. You'll create one of these journey maps, you'll put yourself in the customer's shoes, you may do all of those things. And then you'll start listening, you'll be like, man, I can't believe that. We didn't get this one quite right. But that's okay, because you can listen and iterate. And that's really what Pharma CX is, in my view. It's intentionally create, listen, and then proactively act on that feedback, which is really iterating and changing things subtly over time and making it better and better for really, really important interactions, right? Like, nobody has unlimited resources. Nobody can focus on everything and pour every resource into everything. It's got to be, what are those key interactions that they can't go wrong? It's like a pilot, right? Pilots have to land the plane, right? Yeah. Everything else can go wrong with the flight, right? the drinks might not be served on time. I guess they're not even served anymore, are they? Or whatever, right? Or you might not get the aisle seat or whatever. The pilot has to land the plane. So that's what you have to think about. What are those touch points where, the pilot needs to land the plane touch point? That's your moment of truth. Otherwise, it's going to go south.
That was a great analogy. Our founder and CEO, Sean, is writing a new book all about creating, measuring, and managing customer experiences in the pharmaceutical industry called Pharma Secrets. In this book, Sean presents 20 easy to implement but powerful strategies that you can use to turn your pharma company into a truly patient-centric organization in both commercial and clinical settings. Pharma Secrets will be available on Amazon soon. Go to peoplemetrics.com/pharma secrets to sign up to be notified.
Okay.
Here's our last one.
Yeah, listen, post-experience is so important. Like even in this onboarding case, as soon as the patient onboards, then your job is just beginning. Because taking the dose of the medication once doesn't do you much good and doesn't do the patient much good. It's something where touching base with them on a regular basis, and we do, right, these 6 and 12-month check-ins, Kirk, right, quite often, or if there's an insurance change, it's some sort of touch point event that, you want to make sure you're kind of interacting with the patient just to make sure that they're going to adhere over time and get the outcomes everybody wants. For traditional CX, it could be, I get my bill and I don't understand it, and I've got to go back and check in on that. Or it may even be a post-experience survey that we all get these days after we check out of hotels. That's an example of a post-experience touch point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And this, I think you could see, probably for folks on the call, you can imagine this just, in 15 minutes, you can imagine this as a patient journey of, this is what a patient goes through. And it is, like, this gets to our point of, this is a helpful exercise. This is this is an essential exercise that a group can do fairly easily, and then will yield these benefits. And then from here, it is iterative. It isn't ever, it's never done per se. You do want to build in this and say, okay, this is, we understand the broad patient journey, or the broad HCP journey, or the caregiver journey. Now let's dig into one of these and say, as Sean mentioned earlier, what's the website experience that we deliver, or what's the case manager experience that we deliver. But what we found is, for some of our customers, they've just been overwhelmed in the past of starting this kind of process, but coming in through the lens of the patient and try to imagine their journey is a very doable activity that will yield these benefits.
Yeah, and you, like we said, you can do this for HCPs. You could, if a caregiver is a key part of the experience, you can do that for them too. And we think these are good buckets to basically begin with, right? They're big buckets. Everybody understands them. There's probably multiple touch points within each bucket in some cases that you're dealing with. And it's kind of a way to get started. So I hope this was helpful, this program that we went through.
Yeah, and I think one example I'd like to give is, and I've probably mentioned this story before, of a customer that we had where we went through this journey of, what are these key areas. We did settle on the contact center for, we want to collect feedback at this touch point. And then what they found from their patient support team was that patients were looking for answers on just broader broader questions about their disease state that they wanted answered, that they could not get answered by their patient support team, which, as I mentioned, from a process flow perspective, wasn't an issue. And when we brought this up to our client, if this is the issue your patients are noting, they can't answer these questions, the immediate reaction was, yes, we can't answer that question. However, it's a part of the patient's journey that they're asking you, and they are not getting a consistent, depending on which patient support manager they ask, depending on, how good that relationship is, they're not getting the same answer. So building that as a part of the call script just wasn't there yet until, you map out this journey, build that journey map, and then collect that feedback.
And some of the changes were directing them to certain, commonly held resources that they could read through, right? And groups, advocacy groups and things like that potentially, right?
Correct, yes. And that's generally more common now. I think, as of course, because it is just from the patient's perspective, that's key. That's something they're going to expect of you, and they want help in that realm, but you don't know until you first map that journey and ask them about it.
Right. I mean, that's a really good point. And we all know pharma is a very regulated industry, and there's certain things that you can do and answer questions, certain experiences you can create and certain experiences you can't. But one thing that we wouldn't recommend is, if you can't do something like answer questions like Kirk was saying directly, don't throw your hands in the air and say, well, that's too bad. Think about how the patient would feel if you said that, and have a directive where you can say, hey, I can't answer that question directly, but I can direct you to some people, sites, groups, whoever it is that might be able to help. And that's a much better experience for the patient.
Yeah, and what Kirk was saying too about, it not being part of a call script. The other thing that's so important in the world of customer experience is that consistency, right? Anyone that I talk to when I call in should be giving me a consistent answer, even if it's an answer that we can't answer that. It should still be a consistent answer and experience.
Yeah, that's a great point, Madeline. I mean, that's the other benefit of a journey map as it's shared with the team, is any standards that you're creating around these touch points can be shared across the group, because as you said, Madeline, a consistent experience is everything, right? Having a great experience for one patient and a poor experience for the other is much worse than having just a good experience for everyone. You'd much rather have a good experience for everyone rather than have variability in the experience from patient to patient.
Definitely. Do you guys have any other points about this exercise that we did today? I'd love to just do a recap, Sean or Kirk, if you'd like to just do a recap of what those 3 steps are. If we're doing patient journey mapping or just customer journey mapping in pharma, what are those 3 steps we need to take?
Right. The first step is really brainstorming and mapping out every touch point interaction you have with your customer. And we've given you some big buckets to consider to start with, and these buckets can be expanded out to many different touch points within digital, contact center, in person, depending. Then it's identifying what are those moments of truth or moment of truth where if it goes well, it's going to result in an outcome that's very, very positive. If it doesn't go well, it's going to lead to a very negative outcome. So identifying those moments of truth where they have to be great, really looking at those moments of truth and creating an experience, an intentional experience for those moments of truth, where there's standards, there's scripts, there's contingencies depending on different scenarios. And the third step is then, okay, after this is intentionally creating it, we have to measure this thing, and we have to measure it continuously and act on the feedback. And that's the third step of a great journey map, is taking action on it. And some action, is intentionally creating the experience, but just intentionally creating it isn't enough. You have to measure it to see if it's going well. You don't know if you're right. The customer knows if you're right. And the other reality is the customer changes all the time, and you have to, be able to know when that happens and adjust accordingly. So those are the 3 big steps. I hope that was an okay overview.
That was great. Kirk, anything to add before we close out?
I could, as a part of that, keeping in mind that it is very achievable. I think as long as you just pick your audience of who you want to map out, get a few stakeholders who are closest to the patient and can help you understand that patient's perspective. And this is an activity that you can do following those 3 steps that Sean outlined.
All right. Well, great, guys. And lastly, I will make sure that this resource that we shared today, when this goes up on our YouTube channel, is available for download, so that you can use it as an example, just starting point when you're doing your journey mapping. And yeah, I'd like to just thank Sean and Kirk and for both of you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I think this was a really great conversation about all the ins and outs of doing this kind of exercise in the pharmaceutical industry. And on behalf of everyone here at PeopleMetrics, thank you for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe right here so you never miss an update. And have you checked out other sessions of PeopleMetrics Live yet? You can click right here to watch them all. I'll see you there.